we are going to be going over the main reasons why your outside condenser is not coming on, but your inside unit is. One of the first things that we are going to check when coming to the unit is if we have power from L1 to L2. And of course we would hook up our multimeter clamps and turn our multimeter on to see if we have voltage. As you can see, we do not have 240 volts. And if we do not have the proper voltage going to this unit, well, it's not going to be able to come on. So the first thing you're going to want to do is back trace your voltage. So the first thing you're going to do is want to follow this whip to see where it goes. As you can see, this one goes to a disconnect right here. This one has a breaker. Sometimes you'll have a pull disconnect. Sometimes you'll have a fuse disconnect. And in this case, I do have a breaker disconnect right here. As you can see, it is in the off position. So the next thing that you would want to do is remove this casing right here. So here I am removing the casing. So the next thing that you would want to check is your line voltage. So you got your line voltage up here in the back, right here, your 240. And then this wires that hook up to the breaker is your load, which powers your condenser. So the next thing that you would want to check is, hey, do I have power at the bottom of the breaker? And I'll show you how to check that. Give me a second. So I got voltage right here, but I only have 5 or 6 volts, which is not enough. So I don't have the proper voltage going to my load. So you would want to back trace the voltage even further. So the next step would be putting your multimeter clamps up there at the line voltage at the top left and right. I'll show you how to do that. So as you can see, I do have 240 volts present at my line voltage, but not at my load. So that would either tell you that either my breaker is bad on my disconnect and I need a new breaker or a new disconnect, or in this case, it's just to the off position. Maybe something tripped it, maybe there's a short, or maybe someone just turned it off and forgot to turn it back on, or a surge or something like that. Let's say we do not have voltage up there at the line voltage like I have, but let's say we don't have it. Well, you would want to back trace it even further. So your next step would be going to the breaker box panel and seeing if you have voltage of the coming out of the breaker. If you have voltage coming out of the breaker but it's not reaching here, tells you something's wrong with your wire. If you have voltage not coming out of the other side of the breaker on your breaker panel of the house, that tells you your breaker's bad. And then you'll have to get an electrician out here to address the issue. So let's say you back trace your high voltage to the disconnect and then your disconnect to the breaker inside the house. When let's say you turn your breaker on and it trips automatically, well, usually that tells you that either there's a short there or it could even be a bad breaker from it being energized from a weak breaker. And if it is a short, you know, the first thing that I like to do is come here and remove the wires to the compressor, which is usually the wires that are tied into the bolts right here. Not always, but usually you remove all your compressor wires and you would test it to ground. What I like to do is I like to put one of my wires right here on the actual ground and then test each lead with resistance to ground. If it beeps, it tells me I am short to ground. If I am short to ground, it tells you that the compressor is bad. When condemning a compressor short to ground, the last thing you want to do is the isolation test, where all wires are removed for the compressor, which is your common, your run, and then your start on the back of the Herm side of the capacitor. And then you would engage power to your breaker, and your contactor should suck in and your fan should turn on. And that's how you confirm that, hey, your compressor is bad. So that was if we was checking the unit with no high voltage present right here at the bottom of the load. Now let's say we do have high voltage at the bottom of the load. The next thing that we're going to want to check is the 24 volt call from the inside unit. And we want to test to see if we have 24 volts. let's say we don't have 24 volts. Well, just like how we backtrace the voltage with the high voltage going to the disconnect into the breaker, we would backtrace the voltage as well with the low voltage. So let's say we're not getting 24 volts here at the contactor. Well, the next thing we would want to do is backtrace our voltage right here where our condenser wire comes in. So let's say we are getting 24 volts here, but not here. Well, that tells us that we either have an issue with one of our wires not making a good connection, or we are on a pressure switch being tripped, either a low pressure or high pressure switch. And so let's say it's a low pressure switch. Well, you're going to want to check for a freon leak to see if that's why it's off. And you can also have a bad pressure switch too. Could be nothing wrong. Might just need a new pressure switch. One way you can do that is bypassing the pressure switch by taking these leads right here of your condenser wire, undoing the wire nuts, and hooking them up directly to your contactor. That will bypass your pressure switches and telling you if you really have an issue with your pressures or your switches. So that's covering if we do have 24 volts here and not here. So let's say we don't have 24 volts here and we don't have 24 volts here. Well, the next thing we would want to do is backtrace our voltage to the inside unit, because that's where the condenser wire goes along the refrigerant lines and goes inside to the air handler or furnace. And it could possibly be tripped on a float switch. Maybe the drain's backed up and it's blocking the 24 volts, and you'd have to clear the drains in order to get the 24 volts. Or you could have a bad condenser wire. And let's say your condenser wire is bad, you're not going to be able to let the voltage through, and you can test it with continuity. So the way you would test your condenser wire with continuity is you would unhook it from both ends right here, and you would tie them together here at the condenser, and then you would go to the inside air handler or furnace and unhook your condenser wire from your common and Y, and you would test for continuity with your resistance. If you have continuity, well, that tells you that it's reading correctly and you possibly don't have a bad wire. But to do one more continuity check is you'd want to go back to the condenser and unhook these wires that you linked together, because you was testing for continuity to make sure that you had continuity on one end from the other. So let's say you unhook these wires and test for continuity again with none of the wires touching, and you have continuity. That tells you that your condenser wire is touching on the inside somewheres, and you'd have to replace your condenser wire. Now if you don't have continuity when no wires are touching, it tells you, hey, your condenser wire is good. Your next issue could probably be your thermostat. And if it's your thermostat, you can remove your thermostat face plate and you can jump Y, R, and G to see if it comes on. If it comes on, that tells you that your thermostat's bad. If it doesn't, it tells you it's another issue. But we're not going to get into that. We're just going to cover stuff of what can cause the condenser not to come on. So the next thing that could be wrong is, let's say you are getting the 24 volt call here, but as you can see, you have a contactor switch right here that gets sucked in when energized with 24 volts. So let's say you have 24 volts here, but it's still not coming on. Well, the next thing that you're going to want to check is you're going to want to move your leads up here to see if it's allowing the high voltage to pass through. You can have 240 at the bottom and 24 here and have 0 here. If that's the case, that tells you that the contactor is bad. You'd have to change the contactor. If you're getting 24 volts here and the contactor's not sucking in and you don't have no voltage here, it tells you the contactor's bad. You can also get 24 volts here, contactor can be sucked in, and you can still have no voltage present at the top. If that's the case, you would still have a bad contactor. Alright, so next thing, let's say that you are getting 240 volts here and you are getting 24 volts here and your contactor is sucking in and you're also getting 240 at the top and it's still not coming on. Well, the next thing that it could be is your capacitor. right here, which is your most common thing to go out. It usually has to do with most of our service calls. And so to test that, you would have to kill power to the unit, usually at the disconnect, like I was showing you. If you don't have a disconnect, you would have to go to the breaker. And once you kill power, you'll have to short out the capacitor because it holds a charge. And when you are discharging the capacitor, you want something with rubber insulation on the bottom so you don't get shocked. When you are discharging the capacitor, you want to take the leads in between each other and you want to rub them together a couple times. You want to do it nice and good because sometimes one time's not enough. I've still got shocked before, so I do it a few times just to be on the safe side. Now, before discharging the capacitor, do confirm that you have no high voltage present, just to be on the safe side. Once you do that, you're safe to discharge it by just touching the leads together inside, like so. You want to just touch metal to metal, you know, back and forth, all that good stuff. And then you would take a picture of where the wires go so you don't forget. And you want to put them back in the same place. Usually the one with the 2 prongs is the fan. Usually the one with the 4 prongs is the common. And then of course the 3 prongs in the back is usually your Herm for your compressor. Now, if you can't remember all that, you know, just take a picture, and you also have a wiring diagram. Just in case you forget where to put the wires and you didn't take a picture, you don't have to worry about it. But you would test your capacitor for capacitance just to make sure it is not weak. If it is weak, it will not start. Run capacitors, you have a spot for the fan and the compressor. So one side can go out and lose capacitance and the other still be good. If your compressor is good and your fan part is testing bad, the unit will be overheating and won't cool correctly. If it's your compressor, only the fan's going to come on and no Freon is going to be pumped. And with no Freon being pumped, you won't be able to transfer heat from the inside to the outside. Now, if your compressor is overheating or your unit's overheating, the next thing that is usually wrong when it's not the capacitor is that it would be the condenser fan motor. It's the next most common thing that goes out. And if your capacitor test is good and your fan motor is still not coming on, it tells you your fan motor is bad. If you want to go an extra step, you can remove all 3 wires or common start run and test it with resistance to confirm it. If you want to go even further, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you, hey, your condenser fan motor is bad. Next thing that could be wrong is the unit could be overheating because of a dirty condenser coil. You know, you go along the fins just to see how clogged up with dirt it is. If it is really bad, it won't be able to reject heat, so it will overheat. And the way to fix that is to clean your condenser coil. The way you do that is kill power to your unit over here at the disconnect or the breaker. Then you would remove the fan department right here. Take all those screws out all the way around, and you would flip this over. Usually I set it against the wall if I can, or turn it upside down, and you will spray the condenser coil from the inside out. You want to use only water. You only use chemicals if you must. Try to avoid using them. Water is your best answer. It doesn't mess with the coils or corrode them. Some people don't mix the coil cleaner correctly, so water is your best friend. As you can see, this one is a little bit dirty, and it is going to need a small spray. Nothing too bad. Spray it from the inside out and then outside in, and then one more time from inside out just to confirm. That's what I like to do. You don't have to do that. Some people just spray the outside when it ain't that bad. That's perfectly fine. There ain't no brick wall behind there. You know, it will still clean it, but it is recommended doing it from the inside out, and that's the way that I was trained to do it, and I recommend as well. And those are the most common reasons of your condenser not coming on or cooling. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments. You have something to say, by all means say something. Please like my video if this helped. Thank you.